This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, joining us is a member of that union. Union proud. We need to get little stickers.
Morning from Australia, anyway.
Good morning, Josh. Blowing my intro. I had a whole thing built up with like a biography that was going to go on for like a good 20 minutes, and we were going to get into childhood accomplishments, and that's all blown now. All right, so Josh Page, welcome back. It's been about a year.
Guys. Yeah, thanks for having me. It doesn't seem like it's been a year, but it has. So yeah, really looking forward to talking about this new album today from Australia.
Now your last pick made Tim and I's season ending review. We thought pretty pressure. Highly of that. So no pressure.
Yeah.
I did tell a few friends about that. That was a nice little Christmas present. So thank you.
So without, let's not wait any longer. Why don't you share with everyone the album that you picked for this episode?
Happy to. Yeah, it's a Melbourne-based band called Sandpit from 1998. The album's called On Second Thought. And I'd say quite different to big heavy stuff that I suggested last year and you guys really loved. So I think they're a little bit different, but also some of the reasons why I love this band and this album particularly is their, I think, pretty unique sound again for the Australian indie music scene of around that late 90s. So I didn't find too many bands that sounded like Sandpit. I really enjoyed their songwriting, their musicianship, and just everything about the band. So I actually didn't get to see them live very much, but just really loved this album. And they were only a band for a short time, 5 or 6 years, but I think they left a pretty good legacy with this one album of theirs.
Yeah, Jay, this is the second one and done band in a row. We did Bike last episode, who were only together for one album. And again, Sandpit, together for one album, as you mentioned, released in 1998. They did have a couple of releases before that. There was a demo cassette that went around, and then they officially released an EP in 96 called Lessons in Posture on Fellaheen, which is the label that they were on for the album. And then a couple of another EP in 97, The Tyranny of Creeps. That came out prior to this record. And then there's a compilation I read called The Hunting Picture. Are you familiar with that, Josh?
That's just the two EPs combined.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
Because that's on streaming twice. So it's a little confusing when you look at their discography.
Yeah, there might be one extra track, but I'm pretty sure it's just those first two EPs combined. So it's 10 or 11 tracks. So.
Gotcha.
So you mentioned that you had talked to the lead singer on Facebook. Has he done music after this?
On Facebook. He's in this little shirt that I'm wearing called Sound as Ever. It's a group of about Australian indie rock from the 90s. It got created, I think, during pandemic times. And so it's a cool little group now that's on Facebook that just celebrates all things Australian indie rock in the 90s. And so a lot of musicians from the 90s in Australia are on that site, either lurking and just watching, and some interact a bit more than others. So Brendan, the lead singer and songwriter for this band, was really kind when I put a post up saying that Sandpit will be featured on Dig Me Out. He came back and said, "Oh, thanks very much for suggesting my whole band, and he'll be really interested to hear what people think of it." And he's just thankful that hopefully the album gets a bit of a wider listen now throughout maybe the States as well because of this podcast. So he was just really grateful and really interested to hear what other people thought of his music. I said he'd be more than welcome to join this podcast, but he was happy to just let other people talk about his music. And yeah, so really, really nice of him to sort of say thanks. But I think he'll be an interested listener in a week or two's time when it comes out.
So it looks like after this, he was in a band called New Buffalo.
I don't think so. I think unless he was involved in some sort of musician role with New Buffalo, I don't think he did a lot, to be honest. His bass player, Stephanie, was the one that moved into Something for Kate, and obviously they took off pretty massively in Australia. So I'm not sure if that's what broke the band up or not, but she moved into Something for Kate. I wasn't aware of the New Buffalo connection, so whether he just did some stuff in the background with that or not, because I know New Buffalo I think she's the partner of one of the guys out of the Avalanches. So, but New Buffalo was pretty cool, some cool records in the early 2000s as well. So,
I don't know where it comes from, but I'm trying to figure it out. He has a credit. He has very few musical credits on Discogs, but one of them is for a Dropkick Murphys album in 2007.
I wonder if I think maybe we'd have to ask him that one, but that's interesting.
I'm like, is there like did they use a part of a song or something? And a songwriting, or did he do a vocal? Like, I'm like,
I'm not sure. I mean, realistically, he did go into obscurity in my view. He did do some albums under the name BL Striker, which were electronic and quite experimental. But beyond that, there wasn't a lot that I knew that he did, really. So he really did just sort of go out and didn't do much from a musician's point of view, or as far as releasing stuff into the public by anyone. So.
Now, Jay, like you, I'm assuming we're both unfamiliar with this record going into this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I looked at the cover, and when I looked at the cover, I was like, that kind of looks like the grown-up version of the Afghan Wigs Gentleman.
Oh yeah, it does. I never thought about that.
That's funny.
It's like Gentleman 2.
Well, and the genders are reversed.
Right.
But yeah, totally.
Yeah, I just saw that.
It's a very solid that should be the cover for when he makes, how there was the Unforgiven 2 and 3 by Metallica. There could be a Gentleman 2.
That's cool. I don't think they'd be unhappy with the comparison to the Afghan Wigs.
We're by law, we're required to mention either the Afghan Wigs, Catherine Wheel, or Failure at least once during every episode. That's all right.
Fair enough.
And with this band name, I wasn't sure what we were going to get. I was like, is this going to be like Quicksand?
Right. Oh yeah, that's a very 90s.
Like, what is that name?
Like, yeah,
telling me.
Like looking at the name and this could have been an electronica album. Like this could have been like trip hop. Like I had no idea what this was going to sound like.
Well, I'm glad when you get these bad band names from me, and you guys got no idea.
Right.
So we did get some comments, and we'll share the poll at the end of this episode, how this turned out with our Patreon folk. But we got some comments. Jason Pan said, bought the reissue vinyl of this a few years ago, following Steph's career backwards from my love of Something for Kate. We'll have to spin it up again soon to remind myself. Willie Dillon said, sounds like pretty solid indie rock to me. There's certainly influence from bands like Bedhead and the like. They also mix in some more rocking songs as well. Probably won't blow anyone's brains out of their brain pit, but I'm glad to have heard it. Brains out of their brain pit. That sounds like something that would be on Righteous Gemstones, that Kelvin would be like, don't blow your brains out of your brain pit.
Yep.
Sorry. Got to mention Righteous Gemstones also once per episode per our HBO Max contract. Richard Waterman said, au contraire, I'm looking in the pit of my skull and the brain is nowhere to be found. Alas, Sandpit has indeed done to me what you said couldn't be done. You are a fraud of the highest caliber, Mr. Dillon, and I bid you good day. Oh yeah, Worthy album reminds me of Pinback and other indie rock, post-rock bands of the era. Best track is Greater Expectations. And then Jeff Gentis said, I have never heard this before. Shoot it into my veins. Worthy. So some positive comments there on this album from our Patreon community. Let's dig into it. Jay, tell me one thing you liked about On Second Thought by Sandpit.
I love the clean guitars. I love the sort of overall approach and how they use them. The guitars lines are very melodic, sort of this mix of lines and chords. And it's tough to do, I think, clean guitars well, where it doesn't come off, boring or thin. And I just think they do a really good job of sounding like a big full band and having muscle without always relying on distortion. Um, and that leaves room for the bass and the drums. You know, it's not a huge drum sound, but like when everything is together, it sounds like a big band sound. It also helps the vocal quite a bit because he sings in a bit of a whisper at times or a very hushed kind of tone. And again, with being able to use clean guitars really well, it just opens up all of the space where they can do a bunch of stuff. And it deceptively, like, you wouldn't think it makes them sound bigger, but I kind of think it does. In that you can hear the whole band. I also like the vocal melodies. They're really unique. The only other person I could think of was Craig Wedren from Shudder to Think. The song Metamorphosis and Walk a Straight Line. Just the notes he's putting together vocally and the way he sings is very unique. Like I said, Craig is the only other person I can think of that sings like that. It's a very kind of unorthodox melodic approach. Like, it just is in this place that you wouldn't necessarily assume it would go.
The story begins with me and you. And if I was to tell the truth, I was always afraid of something not like this. It's just like a movie or a short novella. We appear in every scene, failed the screen test. Just making way for what comes next. I'm lost and you're misunderstood. Back from a trip to hell.
And then the tone of the voice too is pretty interesting. He's able to do like this hush whisper. So for those songs that are cleaner, or those sections of songs that are cleaner, he can deliver this kind of sincere, intimate vibe where you're like right in there with that soft vocal. But then he also goes to a falsetto in a couple songs that really cut through and have some energy and just get some dynamic going vocally. So I'm also enjoying the vocal tone and overall sort of range, even though I wouldn't say he's like a classically great rock singer. But he's got a voice and it's unique, and I think he uses it well to serve the songs. That's some of what I liked. How about you, Tim?
A lot of the same stuff. I'll just expand a little bit. This reminded me of like the good things that I liked in Polvo, the band that we checked out not too long ago. I think maybe it was the end of last year. It's that angular slowcore indie rock sound that I think you mentioned why there's a really interesting dynamic, which is his vocal, like Walk in a Straight Line. That totally is, like you nailed it. It's a Craig Wedren kind of, like, it's odd and like definitely pushing the boundaries of what it would be normal rock vocals, and even like indie rock vocals. You think of them as being, certain things, and like when they start throwing in weird patterns like or falsettos and things that really aren't supposed to be there, then you go, oh, he's doing something different. So I think a lot of people might compare this to like Slint in that sort of slowcore vibe, but I think what works best is when it gets weirder, when it gets louder, in the way that like Slint didn't do for me. It felt more repetitive with that band, and there's enough happening melody wise, vocal, and then also what you mentioned with the guitars, that like it doesn't feel as repetitive. And I mean, to be honest, these are also pretty tight songs. 405 and 525, I think, are the only ones that go over 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So you got a lot of, 3.5 minute long songs. That's it. Whereas when you get into like consistently 7, 9, 12-minute songs, that can be hard to take, because it's, you start off with what you would call the slowcore sound, and then Hold Your Horses and Helicopters have these interesting loud parts. Same with Greater Expectations and the closer, Great Paper Fortress. So it's not as simple as like slowcore or anything, because you're kind of like moving in and out of those indie rock genres and pretty seamlessly as well. I mean, there's some Sonic Youth aspects to it, but not quite as chaotic.
Yep.
So I found a lot of that really worked for me well. Josh, so what did you get this album when it came out? Did you discover it later?
No, I was a pretty big fan straight away from their first couple of EPs. And then, I just thought the album was just this huge leap forward. The EPs are great, and they probably are a bit more in that upbeat indie pop rock, sort of like Hold Your Horses or Along the Moors, those sorts of songs. They're more straight ahead, and that's what I loved about this album. It's this sort of combination of those more up, straight ahead sort of indie rock songs, but then songs like Metamorphosis, which for me is my favourite song with track 2 on the album. It's just something about it, the clean guitar, and as Jay said, his vocal, like they're the two things that always stand out for me that I think are so unique, particularly of the time where not many bands in Australia were experimenting or I think confident enough to experiment with clean guitar. There was lots of distortion, and Sandpit used distortion, but I think they use it to great effect because of the clean guitar parts as well. And then, his vocal, it's just so interesting. Like, it's not powerful, but again, I think it carries weight because he's not afraid to use falsetto, because he sings in probably just the way his voice sounds. I don't think it's put on. I think that's just the voice that he was born with, and he uses it to the best of his advantage. So, sometimes like when Metamorphosis is on, he sings some lines where there's just a little bit of a lead guitar behind him. It's like, I find it sort of crushing, like Nelly. It's just, it's a lot of space, but it's very evocative and emotional, and I think it's great. So they're sort of the bits that I love about them, that they can do what I would say the more straight ahead indie rock, where they do get comparisons to bands like Sonic Youth, but then they do this other stuff as well, and it sort of blends seamlessly into this album, which is quite varied, and they do it all. I think they do every style well. Like, I don't go, I wish they did more of the slow stuff, or I wish they did more of the fast stuff. It's like it just all fits really nicely into a pretty tight 10-track album.
Jay, would you call this a lo-fi recording?
No, I wouldn't. No,
but it's not. It's not glossy. It's not like pop production either. So it's like that's what I was getting at. It's kind of in the middle production wise, and I think that actually works to its benefit, because if this was low end, those guitars would sound awful.
Oh yeah,
especially when they got loud. And if it was too polished, it wouldn't sound right. But there's a nice balance, especially in the clean guitar. There's enough bass in that clean guitar.
Oh yeah.
That a lot of like lo-fi recordings, that's what they miss, and you get that really reedy sounding guitar tone that can get great.
If you go into Bandcamp, you can hear some demos, and that's exactly what you hear. It's God, if that was recorded like that. And no offense to the band, because the album's awesome, but I just did some demos today, and I was like Helicopters as a demo, and I was like, oh, that sounds so bad compared to the album.
Right.
And so in demo format, if they stuck with that real, trendy lo-fi sound, it wouldn't have sounded right. And the guy who drummed on the album, Greg Wales, he's a fairly prominent producer in the Australian indie and sound engineer in the Australian indie rock scene. So I think him joining on drums, but also being the producer, was obviously a godsend. He's produced a lot of stuff, or sound engineered a lot of stuff, from UMI to Powderfinger to lesser known bands as well. So he joined on drums, but has always been their producer / sound engineer. And I think he did a fantastic job, as you say, getting that mix right between not too glossy and sheeny, but definitely not in that lo-fi vein either.
Stuck trying to fight this fear inside, but it occupies my time now. Just
it's a good, honest production. You know, it sounds full range, like high fidelity in terms of like it's not missing a spectrum of this, you know, sound spectrum like some lo-fi recordings do, but it doesn't have a lot of extra reverb and delays and like gloss on top of it. It's just a good, honest, I think, rock production. And yeah, I mean, you touched on it, but the capturing that guitar tone right. I don't know if he's playing a Jazz Master or Jaguar, but to me, that's what it sounds like, where you get that like really meaty mid range. Yeah. And that's so critical when you're doing a lot of clean stuff, is otherwise it just sounds brittle and small.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like a Telecaster.
Right.
Is there anything that doesn't work for you on the record?
Sometimes the guitar and the vocal are a little too samey. I'm assuming, based on what I'm learning about the band through this conversation, is that the singer is also the guitar player.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that's, I know from watching other bands and being in bands, it tends to happen sometimes, is that if you're singing and playing guitar, you go into these modes or sections of the songs, or sometimes entire songs where the two are almost playing the exact same thing. Some of that is fine. Like I think there's some good examples of where the dynamic of him doing that, where like he's in sync with himself and then he goes out of sync with himself. It's kind of cool. But there's some other sections where, and even songs like I Positively Hate You Now is a good example, where I just want some more dynamic between the two, and it's just too samey. You know, it gets a little, I think some of the tempos get a little bit like plodding. There's some slow builds. There's sections where there's no vocals. Could just be a little tighter, a little bit more dynamic. Examples are like Whole Again, DI Eclipse, even Walk in a Straight Line. Even though I like parts of that song, there's other sections where it gets a little slow. And I like the distortion when they kick into it. There are some cases, though, I think Along the Moors is a good example, where when they go to distortion, it actually sounds smaller. It doesn't explode. It gets a little noisier, but it doesn't like give you that big effect from going, you know, from clean to a big fuzzy sound where you get that like explosion dynamic. It doesn't kind of work that way with this band. So sometimes there were some sections where I was like, you know what? I would have been okay if they just didn't get dirty here and they just stayed clean. I think Crepe Paper Fortress is a good example where it does work. So it's just a little inconsistent, like with getting the, I think, distortion sound right with how big the clean sound is. You certainly don't want it to feel like it gets smaller when you click on the distortion pedal.
Right.
So just some little details like that I think, you know, could be better.
But we could run to the forest, skip along the moors, catch a jet plane over mountains, fly across the seas, flying so low to a village in the country.
And
Something with you.
that's same thing. That's a cause by when you use like a guitar pedal, it changes the frequencies, and so your bass end that you had for like clean tone is gone. It gets sucked up, and so that's why that happens. Yeah, I agree. I think they would have been better off either just not doing that or like put the distortion on the bass. Like give me some like distorted bass. And I agree with you. I think the rhythm thing, there is this tendency in slowcore, and we heard this with Slint, and we've heard this with Polvo, or you know, if you've ever listened to like early Sebado or Luna or anything like that, the drums are just like boom, tss, boom, tss. And you're like, if you could just throw in the odd like boom, tss, give me just one little extra every 3 and 5, you know, like something like that. Like just give me something that's just a little off for the beat. That's what's just missing. Like just a slightly bit more inventive drummer that, and you know, I respect them for sticking to it. It actually is really hard to play that slow, on tempo, and simple. But just from being familiar with that slowcore sound, like I'm looking for the band who did something a slightly bit different. And then that makes me go, oh, okay, they're playing with it, not just sort of sticking with what the concept is. So because probably when we get to the review, I mean, the end of the show, like, and I say that this is what I wanted the band to sound like that we reviewed a year or two ago, or 2 or 3 years ago, that is a classic, and we didn't like it, and we should be banished from the indie rock.
We lost our indie rock membership.
And I say this is better.
I'm interested.
So, is there anything that doesn't work for you on this, Josh?
No, I'm obviously an unabashed 5 stars, 10 out of 10 man on this one. But I love that I think you're nitpicking, and that's good. So it shows that it's pretty strong. So no, I can't say the distortion works for me, but I'm very much an amateur musician, so I'm really interested in hearing about that. Perhaps a distortion on a bass pedal. I'd be really keen to hear what Brendan, the lead singer, sort of thinks about that now, 25 years on. I know from, as I say, messages on Facebook with him, he's probably quite open to hearing, that might have been interesting. Like he said to me in one email, like, by no means is it perfect, but I'm still proud of the record. So I think he's quite an audiophile and interested to hear that sort of more technical side of things, whereas that washes over my head a little bit. But I'm certainly, I think what Jay said about even Along the Moors, when I think about it, maybe it doesn't actually sound much stronger or more powerful when the distortion kicks in. But then I'm like, I still love the song, so I don't care.
He's trying to chip away your will. Don't let him do that.
He won't be able to do it.
A tiny little hammer.
Jay, do you want to maybe Brendan will share what his guitar pedal was? What do you think what guitar pedal do you think he was using for distortion on this? If you had to guess.
It sounds a little rat-like. I mean, I'm just going with the generics. It doesn't sound like a big muff to me. It sounds a little bit more metallic.
Yeah, like a rat pedal.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, he also refurbishes old pedals and guitars now as well. Like, that's a little side business he runs. So he's very much into equipment and stuff. So I'm sure he'll be happy to share.
Well, I'm gonna guess it's not a Metal Zone, the horrific metal distortion pedal from the 80s and 90s. I'm gonna bet that this is a what's the Boss Overdrive? Is it the it's just called an overdrive, right?
Yeah.
Or do they have a name for it?
They have a distortion too, but
is it just called the drive?
I don't remember. Boss Overdrive. It is. Okay. I guess I'm listening to it again. It's a little fuzzy. It could be a fuzz, but there's like a metallic nature to it that makes me think more distortion than fuzz.
All right, I'm changing mine to a fuzz face. Those were the round pedals they were red and they were round and they had one silver button in the middle. That's what I'm going.
Anyway,
That's
I think
what,
the guitar Jay said like was Jag something or Jag. I think that's the guitar he used. I remember him talking about that. So I think you got that right. But I don't know.
this is like when there's a somebody in the audience and he's like, it's like a guy, a mentalist, and he's like, I'm thinking of I think you're playing an offset. I think it was definitely an offset guitar. It had a
The guitar was asymmetrical.
asymmetrical your
Way
amp.
above
It was
high
it was
grade.
4. No, it was two speakers. Two speakers, frets, a Fender Twin. Were you playing a Fender Twin? I'm gonna start doing that every episode. Guess what our musicians played.
Hey man, we come into these reviews honest. We don't,
You'll get some train spotters.
the music speaks for itself.
There you go. Let's get to our final thoughts on this, and tell everyone if we find it to be a worthy album, better EP, or decent single. Our Patreon poll will wait until we have decided. Jay, what do you say?
Worthy album for me. It's only 37 minutes. I mean, geez. I nitpicked it here and there, but I think Along the Moors, Hold Your Horses, Helicopters, Great Expectations, and Crepe Paper Fortress are really strong, and the songs between that are still interesting enough for a worthy album for me. Where do you land, Tim?
I agree with you. The only song that doesn't really work for me is DI Eclipse. But
Yeah.
the rest of the album, I think, has really interesting moments. Melodically, what he's doing vocally, and then the interplay between all the instrumentation. And I think that this works in terms of a slowcore kind of thing, like better than the Slint album. Like, I think this is better than that record.
Hot takes.
Hot takes.
So do I.
Shots fired.
I'm about to unleash a truth upon the world that has been forbidden by the elite, and that is, On Second Thought by Sandpit is actually a better album than Slint's Spiderland. I couldn't even remember. It was so
I agree.
uninteresting to me.
But he whined about their precious Slint not putting on records, and you got Sandpit picking up right where they left off.
There you go. So yeah, I definitely think it's a worthy album, and I'm bummed that I went to look at their Bandcamp and their reissues are sold out.
Yeah.
So I'll have to come to the CD via Discogs. It's a formality, Josh. Just you can give your
very worthy album. The songs Jay mentioned are obviously the more, I would say, upbeat, real straight, not straight ahead, but rockin' songs. But I think the ones with a bit more space in between are some of the stronger material for me as well, particularly Metamorphosis. I love that song. And but even, I Positively Hate You and Walk in a Straight Line, a couple of those other slower songs, I still love the space that's created in those, and his vocal performance, I think, shines in those songs as well. So yeah, worthy album for me.
Well, our Patreon community, they're with us. 71% said worthy album. 29% said better EP. So that's it. That's the voice.
2 for 2. 2 for 2.
2 for 2. And both bands that are primarily slow.
Yeah.
Do you listen to any music above 70 BPM?
I do. One of my friends used to call my music, he says I like marching band music, which I think is accurate. But I do. But I must admit, like a lot of the Australian bands you guys have already reviewed, like Pollyanna, like Screen Feeder has just released an album. They've been going strong still 31 years, and their new album's awesome called 5 Rooms, and I would say it's a little more than slowcore. So I do like the more speedier stuff, but these 2 albums, particularly for me in the late 90s, were the 2 that stood out for me. There's another one that I might bring to the table next year, but I'll keep my powder dry on that for now.
Well, I just want to mention that you did actually list that your favorite bands in your bio. You said Big Heavy Stuff, Blue Bottle Kiss, who we've talked about, Pollyanna, who we've talked about, Sandpit, and Guernsey.
Jersey, yes, but Jersey are more early 2000s. So,
okay.
So they might not.
So you're
make
saying
it.
it's not amongst these bands?
Not amongst those bands, no.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, we will look forward to your pick, and we thank you.
Thanks again, guys.
For joining us. You're in a totally different part of the world, and you could be having a nice brunch right now with a mimosa.
I'm about to. It's my wife's birthday, so I better get out of here.
Well, yes. All right, let's get you signed off. Jeez. You must be doing something really.
I know. I think I said
today.
yes. I think I said yes before I looked at the date. It's all right.
Oh man, I'm so sorry. Well, if you want to be like Josh and have us ruin your wife's birthday, join us at Patreon.
You can pick an album and join us on your wife's birthday.
Anniversary.
Yeah. Well, good idea.
What day would you like us to interrupt?
Valentine's Day?
Anyway, patreon.com, that's where you go to support the podcast. It's dmounion.com, digmeoutunion.com. You also go to digmeoutpodcast.com to submit an album, to join the Box newsletter, which is delivered every week with 2 new reviews of 80s and 90s relevant music, albums, TV shows, documentaries, books, fictional retellings, all kinds of things. And that's the Box newsletter. Finally, Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. Thank you. We got to get Josh out of here. Good night, everybody. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.